Okay, now we're going to be looking at vertex and intercepts. So as you can see on our board, this time the parabola looks a little bit more complex because our graph has actually shifted to the right and also has shifted up. So both transformations have worked. Okay, so whereas previously we only considered the basic steps where it's going up, just down, or left or right, but this time we're considering multiple transformations. Okay, so in that case the coordinates of the vertex and the intercepts will differ. Okay, will change, so it's not going to be that straightforward, so watch carefully. So in this case we've shifted to the right by c units, so just don't worry about that for a moment. Just have a look at this part. You'll see that I've subtracted c to x and then squared the whole thing. Because remember in our previous section, we've learnt that if we're moving to the right by c units, we subtract that unit of c to x. Okay? And then, you should also realize that we've also shifted up by the unit of d. Yeah, so we've shifted up by d units, so therefore to the whole thing, we just simply add d at the end. Okay? And that's it. So hopefully that isn't too bad. We're just doing the multiple transformations at the same time. Just do one at a time. So shifting to the right, subtract c squared, and then we're lifting up by d, so just add d to the whole thing. That's all there is. Okay, so what can you guys tell me about the vertex? The vertex is not going to be that straightforward as how we calculated in the previous section, right? The vertex is now, the x coordinate is c, the y coordinates is d. So our coordinates of the vertex is cd. Okay, so none of them are actually going to be 0. Okay, whereas previously we know that one of either x or y was going to be left as 0, right? But in this case, both x and y coordinates of the vertex change. Okay, can you see how that works? So what I'd like to do is look at this. Okay, so this part for the x coordinate of the vertex. So see how we've subtracted by c, which one's going right by c, so positive direction, so it becomes c as the x coordinate. And then because we're lifting up by d, so we're just adding d, the coordinates of the y is just d. So the coordinates of cd. Okay, so hopefully you get what I'm saying there. That's what it is. Okay, so have a good look at that one. So it's not too bad, it's just a little bit more confusing than the previous one. Now the other one is when we go down and also shift. Okay, so in this case you can see that we have x minus c, x minus d, which means the coordinates, if I want to find the intercepts, I let this whole thing be 0, right? Because the y, I let it be 0 to find the x-intercepts. So if it's in this kind of form, it's a good idea to actually find your intercepts first. Okay, so it's going to be equal to 0, so x is just going to be, you should know from your quadratic functions, quadratic equations, the basic ones, that x is going to be c and d, positive c and d. So our coordinates of the intercepts, the x-intercepts is going to be c and d. Just plot it in and you can join it. Okay, and the y-intercept should be pretty easy to find because all you need to do is, for both cases, just sub in x equals to 0 to find the y-intercept, don't you? So I won't go through that process, it's just a bit of algebra. But in this kind of one, you know what to do. Just let y equals to 0 like I did there and solve for x, and that will be your x-intercept. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Have a look. So in this case, we're not going to consider too much about the vertex. Okay, so the point of this one, the first graph, was considering the vertex when it's shifting to the left, right, or up or down, and when two things happen at a time. And this is when the intercepts change. Okay, so all you need to do here is just take your usual steps of finding your x and y intercepts. The y-intercept, as I said, is pretty easy to find, but in this kind of case, you should just let y equals to 0 and solve for x, and simply join those points to make graph. Okay? Now, if it isn't already factorized for you, make sure you always factorize it with your quadratic knowledges, and just factorize it and then make it into this form, and then take your usual steps. Okay, so we'll try some questions so you get a bit more understanding of that. Starting with question 9, we have y equals to x minus 2 squared plus 1. Okay, so first of all, if you like, just don't worry about that plus 1 for a moment. Okay, just worry about x minus 2 squared and trying to interpret that first of all. Okay, because if we're subtracting 2 to x and then squaring the whole thing, what does subtracting indicate? Subtracting 2 means we are going to the positive side, the right side. Okay, so this one indicates left or right shifting. So in this one, right, positive direction by 2 units. And now we consider the 1. If we're just adding 1 to the whole thing, we know that it's just going up by 1. Okay, so shifting up by 1. So our vertex will be 2 because we've shifted to the right by 2 units. So it's going to be 2. And we're going up by 1, so the y changes to 1. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Hopefully that isn't too bad. So what I do again is look at this part for the x-intercept, sorry, x-coordinate, okay? And then see how it's minus 1? You just change it to a positive 1 for the x. And then because we're adding 1, we know that we're going up by 1, so the y is just 1. So you just look at these two numbers, okay? This number and this number to consider the vertex, coordinates of the vertex. Okay, so now have a look at that. So now what I'm going to do is just plot that in first. 2, 1 as our vertex, just plot it in. And we're going to find our y-intercept when x equals to 0. So just sub in x equals to 0 into there, just like that. And then minus 2, 0 minus 2 is negative 2, negative 2 squared is 4. 4 plus 1 is simply going to be, well, 4 plus 1, they've already got it for you, and it's going to be 5. So our y-intercept is 5. Okay, and do you guys think that we're going to have any x-intercepts? Well, because the vertex is above the x-axis, I think we're not going to be having any x-intercepts because, first of all, we know that the graph is concave up. Okay, because it's not, there's not going to be a positive in front of that thing, or isn't it? In front of that square thing, it's positive, so we know that it's going to be a happy face. So there's not going to be any x-intercepts, so you don't have to worry about finding that. All you need to do now is join it. That's your graph. Okay? So have a look. So again, all I did was join the vertex and the y-intercept. Whoops. So have a look. So again, hopefully that wasn't too bad. That's question 9. Question 10. Y equals to x minus 2 squared minus 1. Okay, so very similar. It's just that the numbers have altered a little bit. So again, we're going to go looking for the vertex. So what I said was consider these two numbers to find the coordinates of your vertex. Okay, so consider this one for your x, consider this one for your y. Because we're subtracting 2, we know that we're shifting to the right again. Yep, shifting to the right, which is the positive direction. So the vertex of x is going to be positive 2. Now, if we're subtracting 1 to the whole thing, we know that we're going down by 1, isn't it? So if we're going down by 1, the y coordinate will also go down and make that negative 1. Okay, so that makes 2, that makes negative 1. So hopefully you find the pattern. So plot it in. And then the y-intercept, just sub in x equals to 0. So it's going to be 0 minus 2 squared minus 1. 0 minus 2 squared is negative 2 squared, which is positive 4. And then we're subtracting 1, which just makes 3. So our y-intercept is going to be 3. Okay? Now I think it's a good idea to find our x-intercepts as well, because as you can see, the vertex is below the x-axis, which means I think it's going to pass through the x-axis at some point. So we might as well find it. So sub in y equals to 0, so that whole thing will become 0. Okay, move 1 over to the other side, so I'm going to gradually solve it. So because this is squared, I know that x minus 2 is going to be plus or minus 1, so positive 1 or negative 1, and just solve it individually. So x will be 1 plus 2, negative 1 plus 2, or you can just keep the other around. I just made it positive 2 plus 1, positive 2 minus 1, which is basically the same thing. So have positive 3 and 1, as our coordinates of the x-intercept. Just plot them in, so 1 and 3 like that. So we know that the graph should pass through all these points, and even if I don't tell you, you should already know how the concavity works. The graph is obviously concave up. Even by not looking at the equation of the graph, we know that because if it wants to pass through this, it should be positive, right? But if you really like, you can consider it. We know that this one has a coefficient of +1, so it's going to be concave up, passing through all those points. Okay, so that's the graph. Okay, so we can hopefully realize that the shifting, the transformations are a big part of this. Okay, question 11, y equals to negative x minus 1 squared plus 1. Okay, so the bit of a difference here is that we have a negative in front. Hopefully, all of you guys can tell me at the end what that indicates. So I won't worry about that for a moment. I'm just going to consider the vertex first of all. Vertex, you only need to consider this number and this number. Okay? That's what I get. Because if it's -1, okay, x minus 1, we're shifting to the right, which is the positive direction, so the x becomes +1. So what I like to do, what I like to think is if that's negative, the x coordinate will just be a positive. Okay? If that's positive, the x coordinate will be a negative. That's how I remember it. So because that's negative, the x coordinate becomes +1. Okay? And now this one is straightforward. It's +1, so the +1 is the coordinate of the y for the vertex. Okay, because we're shifting up, which means we're going up in a positive direction. So that's why it's going to be 1. So hopefully vertex is pretty simple for you guys now. Now, just plot it in. And we're going to find the y-intercepts when x equals to 0. So sub in x equals to 0, you guys can solve that. 0 minus 1 is -1. -1 squared is +1. So I have negative +1, which is -1, plus 1, which is actually 0. So the y-intercept, is going to be 0. Okay, so just plot them in. And we'll of course find our x-intercepts. So sub in y equals to 0 and solve for x. So what I did was actually move this one over to this side, so it becomes positive x minus 1 squared, and just shifted the equation around. So I have x minus 1 squared equals to 1. Okay, and then x minus 1 is going to be plus or minus 1, so +1 or -1, don't forget those two. And then just shift 1 to the other side, so we have +1 plus 1, +1 minus 1. Okay, and you should get 2 and 0. So these the step. It's pretty easy, right? So just plot them in. We have 0. 0, we've actually put it already there. All right, so we have actually the common intercept for x and y, which is at 0. And the other one is 2, so just plot in 2. So now we're just going to consider our concavity and finalize the graph. All of you guys should be able to tell me that the graph is concave down because of that negative. We have a negative coefficient, which means it's going to be concave down. A sad face parabola, just join it and just make sure it's negative. Okay, going downwards. That's what the graph is. Okay, so do you guys kind of get the idea now? Alright, that's question 11. Question 12. Sketch y equals to negative x minus 2 squared minus 1. Okay, again we're going to first find our vertex. So vertex is going to be 2, -1. Because this is -2, which means we're going right again. So remember guys, I said if it's negative, make it into a positive and make it +2 for this case, for the x coordinate. And the y, we look at this one, we're going down. We're subtracting 1, which means going down to the negative side. So it's just -1, as it says over here. Okay, so that's our coordinates of the vertex. Just plot it in. Now the y-intercept, sub in x equals to 0, just like that. Guys, you can go ahead and find that. 0 minus 2 is -2. -2 squared is 4. 4 with a negative in front is -4 minus 1, which is -5. Just plot it. And again, the graph is concave down, and because you can see there's a negative in front. So this is kind of easy to do, right? Yeah, just all you need to do is look at the coefficient that's in front, and if it's negative, we know that's going to be downward facing. And I'm not actually going to go looking for the x-intercept because I know it's concave down, and I know that that's the vertex, which will be the highest point of the graph, and it's actually below x-axis, which means it's not going to pass through the x-axis in this case. So I won't go looking for the x-intercept. If you really like, you can actually go looking for it. Okay, you can set sub y equals to 0 and trying to find for x, but you'll probably realize that the equation won't solve. Okay, that means that there's no x-intercepts. But as I said, there's not much needed now solving for the x-intercept because we know that the vertex is below the x-axis. So just join those 2 points, making sure it's a concave down graph. That's what the graph is. Okay, and you can see that there's no x-intercepts. Question 13. Okay, so we have this kind of form. Remember we had this form when I introduced this part? Okay, all you need to do is start by finding your x-intercepts by subbing in y equals to 0. So in this case, don't worry too much about your vertex. The intercepts are more important to find. Okay, so that's what it's going to be. Just sub in y equals to 0, just like that. So you guys should tell me x is going to be positive 1 and negative 2. So plot them in. Negative 2, 1 is our coordinates of the x-intercepts. So y-intercept, just sub in x equals to 0. So 0 minus 1 times 0 plus 1, which is negative 1 times positive 2, which is negative 2. So the y-intercept will be at negative 2. Okay, and then we know that the graph is concave up. Okay, all the x's have a positive coefficient, so everything is positive, so we know that's going to be happy, and then just join it like that. Okay, so that's it. This is all they require to draw in this particular graph. Okay, so don't worry about your vertex too much for now for this kind of graph. Okay, your intercepts are most important if it's in this form. Okay, so that's it. That's question 13. Question 14, again, similar form but different numbers. So again, all I'm going to do is first find my intercepts. So starting with the x-intercept. So sub in y equals to 0. You should know that x equals to negative 1 and positive 2. Plot them in. And then of course find your y-intercept. So sub in x equals to 0. So 0 plus 1, 0 minus 2. And then it's going to be 0 plus 1 is 1, 0 minus 2 is negative 2, which is negative 2. Plot in negative 2. And then all we need to do is join it. But you should consider the concavity, of course. But you should know that the graph is going to be concave up. Okay, all of you guys should be able to tell me because the coefficients of x are all positive. So just join it. That's your graph. Okay, so very simple. I think this part is more simple than the previous parts. Okay, because it's just about finding your x and y intercepts. 15. Okay. The only difference here is that it's got a negative in front, but again, yes, all of you should know what that indicates, so I'll ask you later. So I'm going to start by the usual step of finding the x-intercept. So sub in y equals to 0. Now if it's equal to 0, I can actually, don't worry about the negative, okay, because the negative you can just eliminate that. So the x will just be positive 1 and 2 if we solve it. Just plot it in. And then now we'll find our y-intercept, so sub in x equals to 0. Just like that. So 0 minus 1 is negative 1. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. But because we have the negative in front, it's going to be negative 2. So plot in negative 2. Okay? And now guys, we'll consider that negative. We'll consider the negative in front of the whole thing. What does that indicate? Yes, it means the graph is concave down. It's going to be going downwards, a sad face parabola. So it looks like that, passing through all those points. Okay, straightforward. Now question 16, this will be our final question for this part. Y equals to negative x plus 1, x plus 2. Guys, you guys can do this by yourself, but I will explain it, but you guys should know exactly what I'm going to be doing before I even say. So starting with the x-intercepts. Just sub in y equals to 0, just like that, and then what's your x? Negative 1, negative 2. Plot it, just like that, negative 1, negative 2, and then find your y-intercepts. So sub in x equals to 0, just like that. 0 plus 1 is 1, 0 plus 2 is 2, so the answer is negative 2, because 1 times 2 is 2, with a negative in front is negative 2. And then we know that, yep, of course, plot it. And then you know that the graph is concave down because, of course, of that little negative sign in front. That indicates the concavity. It's going to be negative, downwards. So just join all those points and making sure it's negative or downward facing parabola. That's your graph. Okay, so see how simple those steps were? So all you need to know for this part is how the vertex changes, okay? Because sometimes the graph not only shifts left or just right or just up or down, it shifts has multiple transformations. So make sure you can find the vertex more accurately with those. And of course this one, make sure you're very critical about your x and y intercepts.